welcome back to another Beating a Dead Horse live stream. As always, I am your host, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, Becoming Human.
Just slowly becoming human. It's us. It's a bunch of chappies. We're all here. We're here to talk about Detroit Become Human. It's a video game by David Cage. That much is clear. And I guess before we really talk about what it all is, we should clarify that there are 3 people in this game. You have 3 main characters, and so we played this game a little bit differently with 3 people.
Could it be another special guest episode?
Hi.
All right, I thought you would understand that's her cue.
Hi, it's me. What do you want me to say more? Oh, hi, I'm Sam.
There we go. That's what we're looking for.
That's my character on the podcast, guys. I'm the clueless yet lovable scamp.
What a role to play. You know, we're all playing roles here. Detroit Become Human, and it was, I gotta say, guys, David Cage, absolute hack fraud. He is possibly one of the worst writers of dialogue in video games, which is saying something. And I'll be damned, though, if his games aren't consistently super memorable and entertaining. I had a wacky time, especially with the way that we played this one. I can't imagine doing it any other way. Created a lot of interesting dynamics. So honestly, I would genuinely, just to get ahead of us here, I would genuinely recommend playing Detroit Become Human because it's such schlock, but only do it in the circumstances that we did, which is you get 3 people, each one seizes control of a different character, and then you watch how it all plays out.
It was an absolutely wonderful time to do it like that. And so before we get further into it, let's kind of explain who we all ended up with.
Well, wait, guys. I have to say, if we're role-playing as our characters this entire episode, then, let's see. I am a mother, and Jackson is a revolutionary black man brutalized by the police, and Sean's just a white guy.
Hey, what's up? It's me. I'm Sean. I'm just playing myself this time.
Privilege and all.
Sean doesn't get to just be a white guy. He gets to be the world's blandest white guy.
Oh my god, Connor is so fucking bland. I ended up we literally, our character selection, we didn't actually choose ahead of time. We literally started off, we weren't sure if Sam was going to be able to join us the entire time, so originally she was just going to kind of chill out with us while we played. And like I bought the game, so I picked up the first character, who ended up being Connor. I passed it off to Jackson for the second character, who ended up being Marcus. And then Sam's like, oh, I guess I can take a character. And we handed it off to her, and it ended up being the woman.
Who you can summarize her role in the game with that statement. The woman. That's it. Because this is a David Cage production.
She's a mother.
As all women aspire to be.
Women aspire to be.
Can you really become human as a woman without a child that has a greater life meaning than your own?
God, I didn't even think about that element of it.
Because David Cage is such a hack writer, they even say it outright at one point. I think Luther says it to you.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, he does.
Before we keep going, do we want to talk a little bit about like our opinions of the game early on? Like what do we all think of the game? And I'm gonna kick it over to our guest first. So Sam, what is your final thoughts of Detroit Become Human? And this is important. Bear in mind, it is not a political game. So if you have any political messaging that you want to slip in there, look at it objectively as only a game.
Oh,
I know.
Robots. Don't worry.
Okay.
Every element of this game reflects the truth in every way that it does. All women do want to be mothers. Every white man is just as bland as Connor is. No, I'm just kidding. I'm really.
No, that one's fair.
I'm alienating your audience, aren't I? Because I'm assuming that most of your viewers are white men in the age of 18 to 35.
rile them up. Controversy brings views.
Uh, anyway, so if I had to sum up my like 2-sentence thoughts on Detroit Become Human, after we finished playing it, I kept finding myself wanting to go back and play it again, or play more of it, or see other scenes, see other circumstances. But I also would never want to play this game again because it made me so angry when we were playing it, because it's full of garbage. And, like, my biggest thing, too, is, like, I just keep coming back to certain elements of it, and this is reflected in our pre-discussion, where I just kept asking question over question of, like, why was this thing there? Why did this happen? What's going on? So.
And, you know, I guess that's a good time for me to jump off, because I already mentioned sort of my flat, like, 1-sentence review, like, play it with friends and drinks, and you'll have a great time. And that I have the dishonorable title of being our resident David Cage expert here. The only one that I haven't played or been, like, seen a complete playthrough of, like, with a friend is Indigo Prophecy. And so I've played Heavy Rain, I've played Beyond Two Souls, and I've played this. And in the David Cage canon, this is certainly far more interesting than Beyond Two Souls, at least, like, on a technical and mechanical level. They're all pretty much equally disastrous in terms of writing, because David Cage is a hack fraud. But Beyond Two Souls basically was a movie. Like, people will levy that accusation at Heavy Rain and this game and other games like it, like the Telltale games, but, like, Beyond Two Souls was literally a game where you had maybe 3 choices in the entire game that actually impacted the plot. Otherwise, it was just watching Ellen Page being sad. And it was a good meme. It brought me many good memes in my life because of how schlocky a lot of the sections were. But, like, as a game, it was just the pits. As far as, like, mechanics,
David Cage, as a game, it is just the pits.
But as far as mechanics, I think that in terms of, like, what David Cage tries and brings to the table, I think that Heavy Rain and now this are actually quite interesting. I think that with the benefit of, like, the Sony, you know, money behind it, and, like, the fact that this is a big, like, blockbuster title as was Heavy Rain, I think that it allows David Cage to do more unique things with this sort of, like, story, like, narrative choice formula than something like a Telltale game does. It feels a lot more natural, and I think that the inclusion of the flow chart, so you can see exactly, like, where you end up going, like, at the end of each chapter, and, like, how you differ from your friends and from people around the world, and, like, a very extreme detail.
Looking at you, friend of the podcast, Desi.
Hell yeah. It gives you a real appreciation for, like, how much work and consideration really did go into making all these different routes and making all the choices, even a lot of small choices that affect scenes in small ways, have actual consequences, which is, of course, always the goal, and always very difficult due to the nature of game development. So in that sense, this is a very, like, technically impressive game. There are, like, interesting moments, scenes, and choices within it, but the problem is that David Cage is a bad writer, both in terms of broad macro, like, structure and, like, theme and character and all that stuff, and also in terms of dialogue. Like I said, his dialogue is oof. Like, it was one of those things where you could literally, there were so many cliches, you could, like, run this through a 1,000 monkeys with a typewriter, and eventually they'd produce this script. Like, just awful. And so that's what kind of gives them their character. That's what makes them entertaining, and yet also frustrating. And that, like, in the hands of a more talented storyteller, you could take a production of this scale and make something, like, genuinely really interesting and great with it. But because David Cage is David Cage, they'll always just be memes, and I'm happy to partake in these memes. So
yeah, it's a really weird game, and one that I've been kind of struggling to put my finger on, like, my true thoughts on it, because I keep thinking, like, I would kind of want to play it again. And then there are scenes that I think about that repulse me so badly that I want nothing to do with it.
All of them played by me.
Basically, yeah, honestly. But like there are a lot of like really interesting moments. It still manages to get some tense scenes across. There are some clever stuff going on. Connor's opening scene is like a detective hostage crisis negotiator is really good. But interspersed is just so much schlock and so much bad and so much weird that like it has its own merit in being fun, barring the bad. That there's David Cage games are just a joy to play, even if they fucking suck. And I think that's kind of really where it comes down to. Like, it's another one of those that's like, if you want to play it, you already know why you want to play it. And so, like, I can't really recommend it to anyone because you already know who David Cage is. You know how you feel about this game. You're going to like it or you're going to hate it already.
Yeah, and there's just one thing I'd like to say about this in his overall, like, oeuvre. If I had to rank the games that I played, I would slot this right in the middle, in that it gets a lot more, like, in between, like, Heavy Rain being the best and Beyond Two Souls being the worst. This gets a lot of what Heavy Rain got right. Like, this kind of gets back on the rails, so that's nice. But I think ultimately why it would be harder for me to recommend this over Heavy Rain is just that Heavy Rain's subject matter and plot was so much more appropriate for David Cage's capability as a writer, and that it was very grimy, very pulpy. Like there were some like overly dramatic themes and some bullshit, but not anything like a lot of what is egregious about Heavy Rain is the same as what's egregious about this game, but the difference is that Heavy Rain's overall plot and overall like metaphor and not politics far less disastrous than David Cage attempting to make a race commentary. Like this
That sounds like a fucking Always Sunny title.
David Cage makes a race allegory.
It's true. I mean, that's basically how it plays out. Like, if you can think, like, this is a game where the androids have to sit in the back of the bus, and that's like everything you need to know about the allegory.
And like that's not even the worst part of the allegory, honestly. Like that is the visual shorthand that puts you where you need to be. But then, like, you just gotta mix the metaphors right out. Just take a couple of, like, immigrants, take a couple of racism, a little bit of slavery in there, maybe just a dash of sexism, and then mix it all up, and voila, you've got David Cage games.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add about what Sean and Jackson said about David Cage in general, except for you said that David Cage games are fun, and no, bear with me.
No. I think I know where you're going with this.
The worst thing I've ever played in a single video game, and this isn't even about Detroit. I'm giving Detroit a pass on this. It's the scene in Heavy Rain where you have to hide inside the refrigerator to not get killed by the fire. That's the worst scene I've ever played in a video game in my entire life, and for that very reason, I cannot say that David Cage games are fun.
Man, you haven't seen Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, have you?
I have not.
It shows.
I think that's kind of interesting though, and that like that's a pretty infamous scene where, like, you know, one of the major differences between this and a Telltale game and Heavy Rain as well is that your characters can die if you fuck up too much, either in terms of like your like actual choices that you make or just failing the QuickTime events.
Thankfully, those are really hard. Like, there's a lot you have to fuck up in these. Like,
yeah.
They are very lenient, which is good.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
I do put a caveat on that, because we only really watched one death scene that was hard to reach. I think some of the other ones are much easier to get to.
Yeah.
I mean, potentially, like, as you go further into the game, like, the idea is you get better at the controls and whatnot. But, like, I remember, like, Heavy Rain felt way easier to die in.
Yeah, and so like I'm always mixed on like what the proper implementation of this, because that's one of the things that I like about these games is that, you know, if you're trying to emulate the feeling of like having to make a difficult choice, like occasionally the game will just present you with these snap decisions that like you don't even have any time to actually think about, and like sometimes that can have disastrous consequences, and like I appreciate that for the realism and like from like a role-playing perspective. Like I think there's something to be said about like I went with my gut and got killed because of it. As
I
opposed
feel like you're
to, like,
talking about someone here, and I don't know who that would be.
Wait.
The person who went with their gut and got killed because of it.
Oh, right. Well, yeah. Well, we're not getting into spoilers quite yet. So, yeah. So, but I like how that can manifest. And I like that more than a Telltale game where you just kind of reboot. But at the same time, it's also very frustrating when you do have to like hide in the fridge or like do this specific sequence of events and get killed. So I don't know. I'm kind of two minds on it. I haven't quite parsed out how I feel about that sort of thing when it comes to his games. I will say it's more interesting than Beyond Two Souls, where nothing happens. And yet everything happens at the same time. So, whatever.
I mean, before we move into spoilers, the big thing I want to talk about is we did mention that each one of us picked their own character. And I just kind of want to talk about like the roleplay implications of that, because like I think it's a really fascinating way to play this game.
Yeah. Do we want to put like a preemptive spoiler on this? Because I feel like to talk about what I did requires a spoiler.
Well, no,
warning.
I mean, I don't think we need to talk about like. Then allow me. I'll talk very broad strokes.
Okay.
Because like
model it for us.
I think when you generally play this game, you are constantly kind of thinking about other characters. Like, if I do this action, will this make it harder for an X character Y to do this? Which is, you know, not necessarily a bad way to play it, but kind of loosens some of the immersion of like it's metagaming is what it is. Which there's a time and place for that depending on who you talk to. But the way we did it, all three of us played our characters completely independently of one another. Like, so occasionally somebody would be like, oh, you should do this. But, like, more times than not, we would then ignore that person just because, like, that's not how I am playing X character. So, like, you know, one character would do something and it would clearly have disastrous effects for other characters. But, like, it didn't matter because, you know, we aren't telling other person how to play that character. So I think it made it really interesting and made the world feel more alive, because as opposed to like narrowing things down to go the exact perfect way that you want it to go, you're actively working against other people, which is what the story is in a nutshell. It's about three people working independently of each other, dealing with each other's actions. But you know, when you're playing all three characters, it's very easy to give yourself the easy way out of all these situations.
Yeah, or even like those areas where the motivations of the characters like do come into conflict. Like, it's most explicit. Like the basic dynamic is this: you have Connor, Robo police officer, you have Marcus, Robo revolutionary, and you have Kara, Robo mother.
Yeah, I was gonna say Sean was sort of dancing around the subject of who got screwed over the most by the other characters' decisions, and surprise, it's me.
So, And like I kind of get, you know, like the gender issue, of course, is a big prominent like red flag when it comes to David Cage, but like I get the role of a character like Kara, and that you have someone who is not like orchestrating the grand sweep of Robo history, and you want someone who's like on the ground, like experiencing, you know, more like low-key discrimination and how these other things are impacting them. Like, I get that, but also her whole role in the story is to be the woman and be the mother, so it's pretty not great to say the least. And so but you know, so there were other occasions where like after I had staged a raid on like a radio tower to broadcast my message, where like Sean would then come in as his cop character and investigate the crime scene, and the whole time I was thinking like, shit, like I left behind all this evidence for Sean to find, like I hope that guy who got left behind doesn't talk, like, oh no. And
it's
I feel
awesome like that. That type of role playing is so good.
Yeah, so that was great. And and I feel like if we had done it the normal way, like based on where your sympathies like lie towards, because you're all like rooted at the same character, like I feel like in terms of your choices, you could end up making ones that don't necessarily make sense for the character or the world. Like Connor is still full like investigation mode at this point. But like if you were playing, because if you were playing Marcus a minute ago, you'd maybe be less incentivized to like actually do a thorough investigation and find the truth or whatever, and like so that could change things in a way that this experience was very pure, very it created some great drama as people would turn to me and scream about how I'm screwing them over, cough cough Sam, with my incredibly disastrous actions, and that made it even funnier. So yeah, I loved being Marcus. I loved it.
One other note on the sort of like role-playing element of it that I did want to bring up just before we get into spoilers, but I think this game sometimes does a bad job of telegraphing what the move you're choosing is actually going to result in, because like
Absolutely.
because like I remember one of us, would occasionally choose an answer that we thought was going to be in line with how we were playing the character, and it would just go so far out into left field that we would like send our whole team scrambling to catch the ball as it just flew into space. And I don't know how to fix that problem, but it's just something that was really prevalent as we were playing in terms of like breaking the reality of role playing.
He's so mad.
Hank fucking hated you, dude.
I have a specific example that's pretty spoilery. So I'll wait to illustrate this, but there's one for my story that comes to mind immediately.
Well, let's dive into spoilers. Before we do, I just have a little bit of housekeeping to take care of. First and foremost, our next week's episode is going to be Knives Out. We're all very excited about that movie. I include Sam, even though she's not going to be on the episode, because it looks absolutely incredible. The other thing I should mention too is if you are a member of our Patreon and notice that we did not release a bonus episode this month, I'm so sorry. We ran out of time. We had intended to get one released this week. We were going to watch a movie when we were together, but fucking Detroit took up too much time and it kind of slipped by us. We'll get it out to you pretty much like December 2nd or something like that. And then we'll get a second episode out in December as well. And then come January, we should be back where we should be. So sorry, and thank you for your patience. Oops. So yeah, that's what we got there. Let's dive into spoilers. And I think before we let Jackson explain what his disastrous decision was, I think we should really kind of explain how each of us played the character, or the characters we were given, in order to better understand our headspace. And I'm gonna let myself go last because I have reasons for that. So I'm gonna let you two decide who goes first.
I can go first. I don't really have a whole lot to say, frankly. The game clearly wanted you to do everything in your power to put Alice first, but some of the decisions that I made, I feel like were not the best
To clarify,
ones.
Alice, if you are listening to this and have not played the game, Alice is your
daughter.
We're in spoilers. You could say Robo daughter.
Robo
It's
daughter.
okay.
She turns out to be a fucking robot. But anyway, like I remember in the final scene of the game, you're talking to another couple with a baby, and they drop their bus tickets, and you don't have bus tickets, and you have the option of lying to them and saying you never found them, and just getting on the bus. But the way that I was sort of playing Kara was like someone who is developing and understanding what humanity means, and I just didn't feel like, even though that might have been in Alice's best judgment, it was the right move for her to make as someone who is learning about compassion and learning about the importance of like humans to one another. And I think that, as she's developing as a mother and as a human, she wouldn't put another person in danger, even if it wasn't the best move for her small family. So that was kind of how I took Kara's story to be. I wasn't just trying to be Alice's guardian the entire time. I was trying to play it as someone who was truly learning to come to terms with human society and the relationships between other human beings.
Then with that, let's throw it over to Jackson.
I actually have a comment about Kara's story that I've been thinking about, something that has been bothering me that I think Sam's explanation of how she played helped me put into words. In that, Kara's story is basically a riff on like Walking Dead season 1, which also is primarily about like looking after a child. You're looking after Clementine. That game is a lot better. And I think part of why is that like I found that a lot of the choices in Kara's story were so like if you weren't 100%, giving your life to motherhood, giving everything to Alice, or if you were doing things that Alice didn't approve of, the game really judged you very harshly for it, and like that there was never a moment where like you had the opportunity to like teach Alice that sometimes like you have to make a tough decision that like it's not always so simple, because like in The Walking Dead, you're considering what Clementine will think about what you're doing, but you are also given the opportunity to like explain yourself to her and like actually make her kind of understand like why you're doing the things that you're doing. And so there's a nuance of that relationship that just isn't here because David Cage nuance lol. But yeah, that's kind of my only comment, because I was thinking about The Walking Dead a lot during these sections. And so yes, so Marcus, I had just a blast. So Marcus's story. He is the android of an old painter man who tries to teach his robot to paint. And it's the worst scene in the game, despite all the like misogynist, racist, questionable stuff, because it's identical to the scene where Chappie learns how to fucking paint.
He's done it. We got Chappie. It's here. It's Chappie.
I was actually surprised.
He's here in the studio.
I am Chappie.
Bring him out.
So I was actually surprised at how little like the Chappie bullshit I'm known for complaining about like actually bothered me, because so much of the movie was about like hack race allegory more than hack like what if robots had feels. Like obviously there was definitely a lot of that, but it wasn't nearly as prominent in comparison. So, but I couldn't stop making fun of the fact that they used the exact same way to like express, we're developing feelings. Marcus is gonna express himself. Chappie liked to paint, and it was really stupid. And then, I get my like punished snake moment. We're going 2 for 2, everyone. And so I get my punished snake moment where I crawl out of the dump after getting shot in the head by the police and decide that I'm gonna go full like I'm already a demon, like get my revenge on the humans and be Magneto. Like
why do we fall on Master Bruce?
Exactly. So and so every time there was like a moral consideration that was like, are you gonna, and again in a really hack way, are you gonna be like a Martin Luther King or like a like a black nationalist, like this is like the civil rights movement, it's deep, man, or is violence really the answer? And I chose the violent option every single time, and it was glorious. And in fact, I was further incentivized by the fact that the Robo waifu character just kept approving of all my extremely violent decisions. and the other guy who's meant to be like the other side of the coin was just like, oh geez, Marcus, what if violence isn't the answer? What about Martin Luther King? He wouldn't approve of this. It's like, man, dude, just shut up. Like I had the opportunity to like intervene and save him.
I mean,
I did not.
see the title of the episode.
And so like we're Josh, that's the character's name. He like invites us out to have this dumbass protest where and this is after I've already murdered several people. So he invites us out to have this dumbass protest, and then like it's literally the surprise Pikachu face me with like I have an army of like 100 androids that I've recruited from the street, and North is like, all right, the cops are here. North is aforementioned Robo Waifu, by the way, and she's like, all right, Marcus, we gotta kill him. And Josh is like, no, this is peaceful. And I'm like, Josh, we're going to war, buddy. And so I launch an attack. and I, did a bunch of QuickTime events, and everything went smoothly, and the result on the flow chart I got was Marcus defeats the police, which was just about the funniest thing I've ever seen. That only emboldened me further. North handed me like a detonator to a dirty bomb that she found, and I was like, oh man, like David Cage is gonna be such a hack that like all this violence and like that I've caused, the political violence is never right, even if you're an oppressed underclass. So obviously like things are gonna have to involve my downfall, so we can show that there's good and bad people on both sides. To the game's credit, it actually did let me get away with a full-on Android revolution. I succeeded in making Detroit a safe haven for androids through purely, like, violent revolutionary means, which, I don't know if I could commend the game necessarily, but I'll give it credit for having way more stones than something like BioShock Infinite, which was peak, like, both sides are just as bad centrism. And so... I played the game like Magneto. I was merciless to humans and kind and understanding to androids, and it worked out great.
Seizing the means of reproduction.
I literally seized the means of reproduction. One of my talking points was literally taking control of the factories where androids were made. It was great. I had a great time. I was doing everything in my power to thwart Sean. And I gave no thought at all to show what kind of cruel revolutionary leader I am. I gave no thought at all to how any of my disastrous terrorist attacks would affect Sam's story.
Yeah, maybe I should jump back really fast and say that basically my storyline was being on the Underground Railroad and trying to get to Canada, and he affected the public opinion so negatively that people were actively trying to hunt me down and murder me the entire time I was on the Underground Railroad. So that wasn't great.
All in the name of our glorious revolution.
And then there was me, Mr. Milquetoast. And I was a white policeman. And so here's how this went down. I was literally sitting in between these two, one of which who was trying to do her damnedest to be a good person, the other one who was actively trying to incite a civil war. And I'm just sitting here like, I have no idea what the fuck to do with this information. So I basically played Connor as the most middle of the road, just like, I am obsessed with my job detective. Like, he needed to get what he needed to do done, and that's all he cared about. Like, Hank, I continued to piss off. Amanda, I continued to piss off because I was just like, fuck both y'all. I'm just doing my job. And everyone hated me. Robo Daddy hated me. Or, I'm sorry, Detective Daddy hated me.
He came around in the end. You didn't get the Hank suicide ending.
He did come around.
He was neutral to you.
He came around to being neutral. Which really only happened because I did sacrifice myself for him at one point. That's what I was referring to earlier, is like gut instinct. At one point you're in the hallway and people, and like a deviant is just shooting down the hallway. And I saw you could protect Hank, and I had already not protected him once, and he was really mad at me, so this time I threw my body in front of him and died. I came back immediately. I got better, is really what it boils down to.
Yeah, Jackson said earlier something about how you don't reboot in David Cage games, and I really held my tongue because I wanted to be like, now wait, don't forget.
Sean rebooted.
I did forget. We couldn't reboot if we died, though.
I will
Right.
say, the problem with Connor's story at the end of this, though, is that none of it mattered. Yeah, pretty much, as long as you did, like, the barest minimum to figure out where Jericho is in, like, the last chapter, nothing else you do matters. If you find Jericho, you find Marcus, and from there you get a choice to either go deviant or not. And like, that's the only choice that you make in the game that makes a lick of difference. Everything else that Connor does, you can just throw it in the trash. Like, I want to make Cop Daddy proud, because I do like Mr. Krabs. I mean, Hank. But it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. Connor's pointless.
And yet, paradoxically, with his investigations, he gets undoubtedly the best gameplay elements.
He really does. Yeah, it fucking sucks. Because, like, Jackson has the best, like, story, but some of the more mediocre gameplay. Sam stuff...
Has nothing. Just say
Sam
it.
sucks shit.
I get to go to a sex dungeon and get assaulted several times and beaten by Todd. And that's
David
what I get.
Cage really likes his sex dungeons. There was one in Heavy Rain too, and I can't remember if there was one in Beyond Two Souls, but there was definitely some sexual assault in that game for sure. I remember there was a scene in a bar. So David Cage really likes that shit.
Which is not great. That's another reason why I would struggle to recommend this to anyone.
Honestly, if you could just cut out the car scenes.
Yeah.
You really could play it as just like a cat and mouse game between Connor and Marcus. It would probably work a lot better.
Well, up until the end when Connor's shit gets thrown out again. But, like,
Right.
up to that point, like, I did enjoy, like, you and I even kind of, like, had, like, a joking rivalry with each other as we're both like, ooh, you left a mistake behind. You killed, you left Simon's dead body here, and I found it.
Damn
figured
right
it out.
I did. He died for the cause.
Then again, yeah, I was going to say, if you hadn't left Simon behind, he would have never found Jericho.
See, there you go.
God bless you, comrade.
I mean, so we've talked broad strokes. Do we want to talk about the I mean, honestly, I'm sorry. There's nothing else to talk about because this game is just about robots. And so, like, any sort of racial allegory or political metaphors don't exist because this is just a game about robots.
Yeah, I just want to pull out my flip pad here. This is me going through my notes from the when we were playing. The president is a Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren amalgam that's also British, and I don't understand that. The unemployment rate is 40% in the United States, which is catastrophic.
For
let's
context,
see.
we actually looked this up. In the Great Depression, unemployment at its highest was in the 20% range. Like,
robots sit on the back of the bus. I know we already said that. I know, but it's on my list. I can't skip it over.
you have to cross the border. You have to go north and cross the border to
God,
Canada.
that was the most
you have to go-
hackneyed shit.
I actually have, as someone who grew up in Metro Detroit, this pissed me off enormously in that the game takes place in Detroit, and Detroit is the only place in the country.
Wait, hang on.
where
Are you sure Detroit Become Human takes place in Detroit?
I'm positive that Detroit Become Human takes place in Detroit.
That's also on my list as to why, but go on.
Detroit is famously, I think, the only place, like the only city in the United States where Canada is to the south of its own border. The David Cage, you absolute baboon.
And then the only other thing on my list is let's see here. Oh, right. Russia is there. And there's some geopolitical contest, World War III plot with Russia that you get mostly if you read all the magazines, which, of course, we did.
It started off as a joke, and then we started actually reading the magazines. No, I like this David Cage. We were talking about this a lot in the pre-discussion, trying to figure out like how David Cage was so weirdly prescient with the fact that like Russia came back, the fact that like it's clearly Hillary Clinton, but her last name is President Warren.
Well, I'd say that this was an instance where he wasn't so prescient.
Yeah, no, it's bizarre. Like I think. Like just if you do play this again now, like there's a whole bunch of weird like comparisons to modern day in bizarre ways that I think really is more a product of its time than anything. Like it sounds wild to be like this feels all coincidental, but knowing what we know about David Cage and like game development time frames, I think it's all coincidental.
I mean, so here's the thing, is that the Hillary Clinton thing actually is pretty easy to explain in that if you go to look at any media from a couple years ago, like even if the president in a story isn't explicitly Obama, he's probably going to be black, just because like even if they're making a fictional president, they want it to resemble the real president in some way. And so that's pretty common for the, like, you know, early 2010s to have your fictional president be black, regardless of whether or not he is explicitly Obama. And if you notice right now in fiction, or at least for the past year or two, things that would have been in development in the run-up to the 2016 election tend to overwhelmingly have women presidents because everyone in Hollywood bet wrong, basically. And so, so that's pretty easy to explain. The Russia thing, I think, is just the fact that David Cage wants his games to feel, I'm David Cage and this is deep. So he takes anything that he saw in the headlines and will just put it in there and, like, oh yeah, there's some shit going on with Russia, with, like, Ukraine and Syria. That's deep. Let's put it in the game, even though it has nothing to do with what we're talking about otherwise.
I mean, add on to that the fact that it does feel kind of 80s science fiction schlock, and, like, there's a lot of, like, Russia stuff in 80s science fiction schlock. So, like, if it's trying to emulate that, God, I always say emulate, and that is not what I mean.
It's trying to set that shit on fire.
It's trying to emulate that. Like, it makes sense that it'd be Russia. On top of that, like, there was kind of a pushback to make, you know, the Russians the bad guys in video games at the time. So, like, to have Russia be the villain, like, when this was in development, didn't feel too out of place for me. Like, it felt like earnest buffoonery.
You know, guys, I definitely hear what you're saying. It's just my brain has such a block up that it doesn't want to accept anything that you're saying and wants to just puzzle over this for the rest of my human life.
Well, let's puzzle.
My Detroit Become Human life. Sorry, go ahead.
Let's puzzle over some other things, like why this is the worst race allegory of all time.
I mean, where do we want to start with that one?
Sam, you got any place you want to start? I understand you were doing some reading on the subject.
Sure. Yeah. So I was reading an article, and I'll find it later so you guys can link it in the comments. So I'm not just being a total thief. But anyway, the article I was reading was talking about why this is such an imperfect race allegory.
And it compared Nier Automata as, like, a good version of it.
It did, yeah.
Like, that's a good game or something.
But so there were two main arguments in the article, and one of them was that if you take what people in the game are saying on face value, that they don't think that androids have true sentience and are really just sophisticated machines that emulate, you know, whatever Sean would say, the emotions of humans, it is the functional equivalent of a man who lost his job to automation arguing with Alexa about how she ruined his life. And it's just totally nonsensical. And then the other argument was that, like, although bigots say that races other than white people are inferior, that's largely othering language that any sane person can understand is not true. But if you look at the society of Detroit Become Human, androids kind of are a threat to humanity. And it's kind of a weird sort of comparison to make when, like, androids are smarter, faster, more intelligent,
can re-upload themselves into new bodies and be theoretical immortal.
And also now gain sentience. So it's just, like, across the board, whatever you kind of look at it, it's just not a race allegory in any way, really.
So this is what I like to call, and I'm not the first person to make this observation, the classic X-Men problem, in that you take a allegory of varying effectiveness. You know, I'm not shitting on the entire X-Men franchise here, but this has always been kind of an elephant in the room, in that, you know, in real life, discrimination is bad because, you know,
bold stance, Jackson.
I know, I'm dropping the real spicy ones here, but in real life, discrimination is bad because, like, whatever hated group is not actually, like, you know, depending on who you talk to, either lesser or, like, a real threat in the way that like a mutant is, that like Magneto is, who in X-Men Apocalypse is like tearing the world apart with its magnetic core. So it's like in a literal level, like it's the same thing here. The problem is just as bad here. Like, yes, they don't account for that. Like, people in these universes have very rational reasons to be afraid of these groups, whereas the bigots in real life don't have rational reasons. Real bigotry is based on irrationality. And so that's bad. The other thing that I was thinking about while I was playing this with this android sentience, it came up in the obligatory David Cage strip club scene, where one of the robo strippers murdered a guy. And from the perspective of that dude, he was just killed by his vibrator. Like, you wouldn't say that, like, if some person had like a weird kink, if we're going with this example, and like beat the crap out of like a blow up doll, you wouldn't call that person a monster. Just the same way that, like, not only is it that it's not like in, if we're drawing another unfortunate comparison that David Cage didn't really think through, this sort of dehumanizing language is made to use to make people think like, oh, like, X group like doesn't have real feelings, or like they're not smart enough to like comprehend emotion, so it's okay that we have this feeling above them, or like, let's not beat around the bush. If we're talking about slavery, that's why it's okay to make this person my property. That's how I'm morally justifying it to myself. The problem is, in Detroit Become Human, not only it'd be one thing if like the androids always did have sentience, but like people treated them like property, but you have to explicitly go and use your magic touch of conscience on different, like, Marcus just goes around. He just touches androids and eventually just starts, like, psychokinesis, like, pointing his finger at him and giving him wokeness, which the game also never...
What the fuck is like, that music video? Oh, no, it's like fucking Jim Carrey in goddamn Bruce Almighty when he's just walking down the street, finger guns ablazing.
It really is. So, like, the implication is that they really didn't have sentience until this point. So, like, if you abuse a thing without sentience, I mean, it's like you just kicked your Alexa down the stairs. Like, who cares, Todd? Like, seriously. And so that's a big problem, and it has really unfortunate implications that are like, until the gamers rise up, they didn't actually have, like, sentience, or, like, there was like some actual justification, if we're going with a hack slavery allegory, for making other people your property, which David Cage didn't think about at all. The other thing he didn't think about was how Marcus, despite being, the android leader, he's not the villain because he was violent in my playthrough. He's the villain because he's burdening all these toasters with consciousness and making them consider, like, what it means to be alive and the eternal fear of death. Like, he's the one doing that in a lot of cases.
I mean, that's succinctly summed up in the fucking Rick and Morty joke with the goddamn sentient butter passer. Like, that is what this is. That is the guilt of Marcus. What's my purpose? You pass butter. Oh God, yeah, join the club.
And like, Rick and Morty acknowledge that in like a 5-second gag, and it's still smarter than the entire like 20 hours of Detroit Become Human.
Well, and I don't even know if we want to go down this well fully and completely, but Marcus is such the incorrect character to be the revolutionary in the first place.
He is, because he died and came back to life. He's literally Jesus. So, like, anything else you have to say doesn't matter. He's Jesus.
I mean, I know. He's Robo-Jesus. I get it. But, like, we see examples of the robots who become sentient truly facing horrendous abuse at the hands of human beings, and that is one of the reasons they are able to break past their programming and become sentient. Marcus loved his dad and got shot in the head because of his dad's rude boy son.
That's one way of putting that.
And like, so like, it's not like Marcus was abused because he was a robot. It's his father explicitly, I'm saying his father, but you know what I mean, explicitly wanted him to be sentient and treated him well.
Chappie like to paint.
And it just doesn't make sense to me. A lot of things just don't make sense to me.
I think that's a fair road to go down, especially like like Marcus gets one throwaway line of dialogue, and oh God, I have to come all the way back here because this reminds me that like this goes in hand with the game's problem of not telegraphing its options very correctly, in that I would often have dialogue while Marcus was like brooding and talking to his waifu, and like you know, you two were there witnessing the absolute terror I was behind the scenes of like I gleefully like took all the violent options. I'm like, yes, comrade, seize the means of production, and yet Marcus spent the whole time, like anytime he wasn't becoming a murderer, like crying over, oh boo hoo hoo, I don't know what to do anymore. And I'm like, God, Marcus, just like you're in way too deep now, buddy. And so he has like one scene where like, oh man, I really had it pretty good, didn't I? But it's just a one-off line of dialogue. Like that was it. Nothing more to it.
I mean, I think just to kind of, because once again, the problem is like I've been arguably kind of quiet through this because Connor is just incredibly fucking milquetoast and doesn't really play into either one of these in any sort of real capacity outside of, like in terms of like social societal issues or metaphors or whatnot, except for in one key part that I kind of just recently realized before we started recording, which is there are kind of a multitude of ways to read what the robots are, you know, a metaphor in this. It's, you know, race relations, immigration, slavery, etc., etc., etc. The problem is that Hank, Cop Daddy, as much as I did like Cop Daddy quite a bit as a character, the way you get him to like you is to be more human, which, if we follow the metaphor, means to integrate into society and give up what made you who you were. So if you follow the slavery thing, you gotta give up your heritage. Same with immigration. Like, it's basically saying, be more like us. Not like you, not like them, like us. Which is not a great lesson.
It's not a great lesson, and it's also a stupid one, because I just thought of this when you were talking about it, because, like, what is not like us in this case? Like, non-sentient, like a toaster. Well, great. Like, that's exactly what we're trying to avoid. So by having this melting pot of metaphors, and I've got another one, too, the game really puts occasionally with its 40% unemployment or whatever dumb fucking shit, it goes for both the androids have taken our jobs angle, both as like immigrants are taking our jobs and as like automation is taking our jobs, and those are two very different problems. Those are two very different issues with very different root causes, and very different sort of outcomes. So the fact that David Cage thinks he can just roll it into one because he has a minority allegory and it's also a tech thing, and be able to just do that and say, I'm David Cage and this is deep. Dumb. And in fact, like, we were asking why the game was even set in Detroit. And, you know, I think we were thinking about it too much, because what it really is, and this is indicative of David Cage's whole mindset when it comes to theme, when it comes to allegory. Detroit as a city is known for two things. It is known for the auto industry. It is known for factories. It is known for like at least at one point having been like a hub of like mechanical development, and it is known for like racial strife and riots that sort of made everything go off the rails, and, you know, from which the city never really recovered. Like, that's again, as someone who grew up in Metro Detroit, that's something that's talked about a lot. And so the fact that David Cage just literally looked at those two things without thinking about like whether it would make sense that Detroit would be the center of this android revival, or like how would this come about in his world. He literally just saw racial strife plus like automotive building and just put them together. Shows how creatively bankrupt he really is.
I mean, do you have anything you want to say, Sam? Because I think before we dive into the Q&A, I have one final thing I want to ask about.
No, go ahead. I don't have anything to add.
So I guess my final question is just from like, it's important to note, if this is your first time listening to us, 3 white people, is this game harmful or helpful? Like, when it comes to race relations, do you think it kind of sets things back and like puts people in the wrong mindset, or are we thinking that like it might not necessarily be a bad thing, or are we thinking that this might have been too big of a question for us to bite off? But like I think it's just an interesting, if nothing else, it's something to marinate on as we play it. I will say as a side, I didn't include women in that because the answer is bad.
Yeah, I can take the first crack at that very, very big, overwhelming question, which is, I think it's the wrong question to even ask when it comes to this game, because I don't think this game takes a definitive enough stance on any of the points that it brings up to really move the needle when it comes to like race relations or racism. And I think the most illustrative element of that is the fact that there is no one true ending. There's no one good ending. Anything that you do theoretically is the correct ending. And there are endings where Marcus dies and Alice and Kara get drowned and Connor doesn't become sentient, and all of the rest of the androids in the world are in concentration camps. And, like, that's theoretically an appropriate ending for this game.
We also didn't talk about the fact that there are literal concentration camps.
But just because of the nature of the way that the game is played, I think that David Cage has no true opinion on anything.
I think with like the concentration camps, I generally agree with what you're saying. I think that, to be fair, some endings are definitely presented as like a fail state in comparison to others. Now, whether that goes far enough is another question, and I think ultimately still makes the point valid. But in the ending where like everyone dies and Connor is a race traitor or whatever, like that's very clearly the bad ending. So I'm willing to cut him a little slack on that. But I think the overall point remains, yeah, in that David Cage, by just using all this iconography without actually thinking about it, or implementing it in like a clever way, the best worst thing I can say about it as far as like impacting political opinions is that because it's so blasé and kind of safe and very, very like Hollywood liberal, I think that the worst, I don't think this would mobilize people into being like more racist or whatever, but I do think that for it's very much like, if we're saying what I mean by Hollywood liberal is something that's very reassuring, like, you know, oh, like here's a movie about a difficult like social ill, but don't worry, you know, you presumably like white audience member, you are one of the good ones. Like, you are not one of these like really bad like android haters. You're not like Todd. So like that can be pretty harmful in its own way. But like overall, I think the game's politics, I generally agree, it's just so like blasé and blah that I don't know. I don't even know how much that matters. And the game has been like roasted to hell and back for a lot of this stuff already. So yeah, I'm not sure. I can see it being I can see it like because this is a big like Sony exclusive that a lot of people are going to play unironically for that reason alone, especially like younger people. And I could see it reinforcing kind of that safeness being a bad thing, but at the same time there's a lot of media like that, and so it's hard for me to get super riled up about it. It's like our first, you know, if we're going off the cuff and like our broad strokes feelings on this question, then that's probably what I'd say.
Well, thankfully it doesn't matter, because this game is not about any of the things that we just talked about. It is, by David Cage's own account, just about robots, and politics aren't in video games, because why would they be? Keep your politics out of my video games.
Now I'm going to go back to playing Metal Gear Solid, infamously apolitical.
And you know what? Bounce back to fucking Nier Automata. That game has no themes. I don't know what you're talking about. That was heralded as a masterpiece. You want to do Q&A?
Let's do Q&A. Let's take a look.
All right.
What do we got?
Let's see. What's going on here? as a quick aside, a product of its time to Desi. I just want to say that I know that like it came out last year, but like including development time, I would add like 2-3 years, which means like the baseline for this story was probably started in 2015, 2016, right about the time that I was talking about. So,
I mean, remember, Kara's character, not that this necessarily indicates that the game's been in development for this long, although considering what a big production it is, I wouldn't be surprised if it were. Kara was shown off as like a tech demo for like the beginning of the PS4, I think.
yeah.
So like, yeah, it's quite possible that it's been in development for quite some time, especially because Beyond Two Souls is pretty old by now, and it's not like Quantic Dream has done anything in the meantime. So,
Also, Desi saying, holy hell, this game took place over the course of a week. Yeah, it did.
Amazing.
Just because Desi has put the dates in chat that the game takes place from November 5th to 12th. The giant Robo Revolution takes place on November 11th, and it's very clearly a September 11th type reference.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to throw that out there.
And also 2038 is way too soon for a society this dramatically changed by robots. So Don Juan's saying, can we use this pod as an opportunity to mention some good race, gender allegory, media, games, movies, etc.? All right, gang, what do we think? Got any that come to mind?
I mean, I'm going to kick this one to Sam because I know she watches a lot of TV shows and stuff that do good stuff. I watch Bob's Burgers.
Well, so I know it's not out yet, but a film that I'm really looking forward to seeing, and I think is going to do a really good job of sort of flipping the police brutality against Black people narrative on its head, is Queen and Slim.
God, yes.
And I just think like that would be a really good film to watch if you're interested in understanding how race relations and police brutality impact each other, and how that whole situation can play out, especially considering in that film explicitly the Black people kill the police officer.
Black Klansman.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I actually wanted to clarify, like, do we mean like straight up like dramas, because there's a lot of those. As far as like well done like fantasy or sci-fi allegory, I'm trying to think of that, because that's quite a bit harder for a lot of the reasons we've already talked about.
And also, you dropped this on us without really having time to think about it, so sorry.
One of the comments in chat is that Steven Universe is a race allegory, and I think that's true, but I would also say that Steven Universe is kind of more of a gender and sexuality allegory, just knowing the influences of the creator. Not that it's a bad allegory, but I think it deals with slightly different subject matter.
Yeah, if we're going like purely on race allegory, one that I've read recently, it's a YA book, Children of Blood and Bone, fantasy. It's not. For one, it helps that it was written by a Black woman, so that is very, very, very much helps that it's not written by David Cage. But even beyond that, like, it deals a lot with sort of like the Afrofuturism like aesthetic, and that's really cool. And even though it also has kind of the same problems, that it's about like a race of magic people versus like, you know, kind of a ruling class. The way that book handles its conflict is a lot more realistic and a lot more I don't even know if I'd say nuance, but just like it portrays those realities a lot stronger, despite having sort of the magical element making it not quite 1-to-1. So
Yeah, and I'll just bring up one third one, unless Sean has something he wants to contribute.
No, please.
The TV show Dear White People that's on Netflix, it's not quite an allegory, but I think it does a lot of really interesting things with race. And the final episode of its most recent season, I can't remember if it's 3 or 4, it does a sort of a flip-flop episode called Dear Black People, and it basically, so the main character in that show, she has a white father and a Black mother, and so she kind of straddles the being half or, you know, dual racial the entire time, and she tends to ally herself more with her black identity than her white identity. And that episode takes it on its head and shows what the world would have been like potentially if she had allied more with her white identity than her black identity, and if like black people were the ruling class in America. And like it's a very funny episode because it's a bunch of white people with dreads talking about how President Flava Flav is ruining the country, but it's also a really deep and introspective look into race relations and how power dynamics shape American political thought. So that's another one that I would just throw out there as a good example of a racially related storyline.
We're gonna make it a little bit of an easier question as a follow up to that one. How did our stories end?
All right, so this was actually the greatest thing, is that we spent the whole game, like I said, I was expecting David Cage to go the centrist, like, BioShock Infinite route of, like, oh, are all great men doomed to fall? Do we all lust for absolute power? Like, I was gonna turn evil and install a robo-dictatorship, or I was just gonna lose, and because violence is no bad, no very good, remember MLK. I actually completely won. I seized control of Detroit for the robots. The revolution was a success, and I was quite taken aback by that. And honestly, we'll give David Cage props that like a pretty much like a complete victory in that sense was even an option. Like, yeah, I had a few characters die. But it didn't like blow up in my face in a major way. Like, the concentration camps were gone. There was like a robot safe haven city now. Like, even though it required a civil war to do it, like, I accomplished my goal. So, yeah.
Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, and I'll just say my ending was a largely happy one. So as long as you don't fuck up royally, you get to the point where Kara can be at the bus station and have the decision of whether or not she's going to steal the bus tickets from the other family or cross via the Detroit River, which is the riskier option, but in my mind, as I've already kind of articulated, the morally correct option. So I chose that, and we both made it. Me and Alice, Kara and Alice, made it to the other side. We ostensibly survived, but the one thing about my ending, I did my absolute level fucking best to keep Luther alive. And for some fucking reason, when you're on the boat, he just dies. Like, he just dies. Like, you turn around and he's just dead. And it doesn't make any sense. And apparently the only way to save him is to go on the bus. But fuck that noise. He ought not have died. I don't understand what killed him. And his final words are about how Alice made him a father or whatever, and I'm just so upset.
I love that you had to unceremoniously yeet him into the sea.
Yeah, because the boat was drowning.
Listen, your choices are what killed him. Your choice to not steal from that family killed Luther. And I can't believe you did this.
My family.
Your family.
The family.
My story ended. I did go sentient. I went to Cyberlife to go awake the rest of them. Hank showed up with not Connor. I ended up letting Hank die because he seemed willing to die for the cause, and I thought it's more important for the cause to continue at this point, like in Connor's mind. I was very mission-oriented, so I let him die. And he seemed pretty content that he died there. It's kind of a bummer for him, but I wasn't too upset about it. And then there was that really stupid moment where I turned my brain off and disconnected from Amanda. So I did that, and then the game ended. And that's that. That's our stories.
Great.
How do you feel that androids can completely integrate into society with no obvious outside differences if they remove one sticker from their forehead with no ill effect? That fucking sticker threw me for a goddamn loop. When they first showed it, like, when they started to dig into it, I was assuming, like, it'd pull out, like, a big, long thing, like, integrated, like, you'd have to, like, rip the wire out type of deal. There's something that I'm thinking of specifically like that, and I can't remember what it is now.
Cutting your finger off in heavy rain?
No, but, like, actually, like, removing something from his brain.
Isn't there something with a animatronic eyeball? Is that what you're thinking of?
Yes, it is.
And like you see the optical nerve coming out.
Oh my god, yes, in Tales from the Borderlands.
Yeah.
Yeah, where you have to remove your eye in Tales from the Borderlands, and like you have to like watch the optical nerve come out and like cut it, and it's like mortifying. And in this, you're just like, all right, and skin healed, good to go, let's roll. It's fucking stupid.
It was actually quite surprising because, like, as I mentioned, that scene where you have to cut your finger off in Heavy Rain is one of the more famous ones for a reason.
It's
like,
real good.
David Cage is usually pretty good at that. Like, whenever you have to do something to your body, like making you really like squirm. But here it's just, well, there we go. Let's peel the sticker off. You know, the new price barcode. You know, from the store floor. Yeah, real dumb.
And like it doesn't help that because, you know, we're all robots, and like like when Jackson did it for Marcus, it really wasn't that bad. I think when Sam did it for oh my god, Kara. When Sam did it for Kara, it was a little bit worse because like it actually got a little bit closer to it. But I mean, it still wasn't nearly as bad. And I think part of that too is that like the action is like a 2-button prompt type of thing. Like the reason the QuickTime events work reasonably well in this game is because they really force you to watch the game. And I think that's a clever way of doing it, of forcing you to like come to grips with like, I need to cut off my finger by holding this, and then like doing button presses with it. So like it's really effective at like you can't look away, you have to watch as you cut off your own finger, and you have to revel in it. And here it's just such a quick pop, and it doesn't matter that like all impact from it is lost. You want to take this has got one more question. We'll leave it open for one other question after this, just as it rolls, because this is a fairly easy question, I think, which is, who are the real monsters?
Capitalism.
It's me. It's Jackson.
Yeah, it's Jackson.
Yeah, Jackson, capitalism.
C's the means of production.
Reproduction, not production.
Sorry. Both.
But yeah, no, Jackson giving sentience to toasters is not great. Sentience isn't good. Sentience is a fucking curse.
It hurts, Ness. I feel happy.
So while we're just waiting for our last questions to come in, I just want to do a quick lightning round of other things that we did not mention in this game that baffle me and will baffle me for the rest of my life. Zlatko's torture dungeon.
Yep.
That's all I have to say about that.
His name was also Slotgo.
Slotgo, sorry. And then
no. I'm sorry, Slotko. I whatever. It's a dumb, silly name for like a Bond villain, and now he's got a torture dungeon. I just wanted to emphasize his stupid name.
I see. And then the other thing that will torture me to this day is the fact that the sex robot that goes rogue and kills the man as his vibrator winds up being a lesbian robot. I said out loud in the room while we were playing that if they wound up being lesbians, I was going to go outside and jump into our frozen kiddie pool on the patio. I didn't wind up doing that, but the fact that it was so predictable and also said nothing just drives me crazy.
David Cage has got that LGBTQ cred, and by that I mean Ellen Page hates his fucking guts because he's a creep.
You know what? This will be the final question. From Don Juan. So you're saying you're a fraud, Sam?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
but I will say that I think that today I have brought a certain kind of beautiful, manic, scampy energy to the podcast, and I would just like everybody to write in, beingadeadhorse@gmail.com. Please tell Jackson and Sean that you want me to be a permanent addition to the podcast, just so I can throw out questions about why media doesn't make sense, that I can just, playfully banter with these two boys. F's in chat if you think that I should just take over the whole podcast and kick both of them out and then make this my whole own operation.
Well, you're gonna have to get in line. Our moms are already like attempting to do that.
See, I'll start a podcast with Lori and Oh God, autumn. Yeah, I was gonna say summer, but that's your aunt, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'll do that.
As a quick aside, parts where Connor and Hank's actors were ad-libbing, they were funny, but David Cage hated it. Of course he did. I didn't know that they had ad-libbing moments. That's great. It's even greater that
Connor,
David Cage...
that's disgusting.
David Cage strikes me as a real prima donna director that, like, if you don't have everything just according to his perfect vision, he'll scream at you. He fancies himself a Kubrick. Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been a wonderful time. Thank you so much, Sam, for joining us. Is there anything you want to promo or say before we wrap up here?
No, I'm a poor graduate student with no job and no prospects. So, what would I even promo?
I mean, welcome to the podcast. What are you talking about?
And see, that's why I'm a natural addition. Your moms have too much money.
It's true. This is a
proletariat podcast.
You beat me to it.
Sorry.
All right. Well, I've been Sean McKinda. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda. Find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Sean_Skippy. If you're in the live chat right now, you know where to look already. I also have a bunch of writing up on 25yearslatersite.com. You've seen a bunch of that. It's like Minish Cap stuff is coming up in a week or two. Previously, I've done stuff about the Oracle games. I've got a bunch of like TV show reviews, stuff like that. Go check that out.
And I'm Jackson Keller. You can find me on twitch.tv/JacksonJKeller. I won't be really streaming this week. I've got Thanksgiving and holidays and bleh. But you know what? We're going to be coming back, probably playing more Mario Odyssey, more Pokemon, not Smash Bros. For a while, because that game has taken like 5 years off my lifespan already.
If you want to get in contact with the podcast, kind of keep up to date with news, see when our bonus episodes do go live, you can follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. If you want to get in contact with us more directly, the best place to do that is by joining our Patreon. At only $1 a month, you get access to our Discord server, where you can come and yell at us directly. $5 a month gets you access to our bonus episodes, and $10 a month gets you access to our requesting bonus episodes. That's over at patreon.com/BADHcast. $10 a month also gets a little, something.
Thank you so much. You get a little shout out right here, like for Julia and Travis and Autumn, Keller and Summer, my aunt. And thank you all so much. Start suggesting things again,
please,
for bonus episodes.
Also, thanks to Lords of the Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should go check them out wherever you can. They're, on iTunes and shit, I think. They're definitely on Spotify, so go listen to them. Go support them however you want. If you get a chance to see them live, do it. They're great. They're an awesome live band. Also, thanks to the 25yearslatersite.com. Not only do I write there, but they also are cool enough to, endorse our podcast. We're on the side banner on the site. And, yeah, they're a bunch of really cool people, really talented writers doing a lot of really talented writing about wrestling, movies, TV shows, video games, anime. Not anime. I don't know why I said anime. There might be some anime in there. But for the most part, it is just a lot of, really talented people doing a lot of really talented writing about pretty much anything you can think about. Next week, as I said, we're going to be talking about Knives Out. So please come hang out for that one. It's going to be a great episode. It's not going to be a live episode, but you can find that at badhcast.com. Go do that as well.
Knives Out for Harambe.
Seize the means of reproduction.
This ending got away from me. Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go